Every day at President Lincoln's Cottage, we engage with visitors in conversation on difficult topics, from grief to slavery to American identity. Visitors, young and old alike, connect with us from next door and from around the globe.
And occasionally we get asked a question on a tour that stops us in our tracks, one we wish we could spend a half hour answering. Some of these questions on their face seem innocent or simple, but on a second look, they contain a level of complexity that leaves us wanting to know more. Each episode, we'll investigate a single real question a visitor asked us here.
At President Lincoln's Cottage, we're storytellers, historians, and truth seekers. So we called on people whose expertise can speak to all the facets of these questions.
I'm Callie Hawkins.
And I'm Joan Cummins. This is Q&A. Come on down the rabbit hole with us.
Let's take that half hour now. For this episode, we're exploring the question, is the house haunted?
I've had kids ask me this question right before we walk into the cottage on a tour, and also I've had adults ask just as we're going up the stairs to the second floor.
We had never talked about this before working on this episode, but those are exactly the places that I have experienced it with visitors too. Especially when people are touching the banister on the stairs. It's astonishing to me how often we get asked this question.
Our producer Haley had a very specific instance of this question that stuck with her.
It was at the end of a tour that I was giving. The person who asked me this question was just sort of like a middle-aged mother with her 2 kids. And the question she asked me, the way she phrased it was, how many ghosts are here? Is it more than 7? So I said, did you see something? Did you feel something? And she said, well, I definitely saw a pair of shoes following us from the drawing room into the library.
How much of this is real? What do these kinds of experiences mean? We're going to explore this question without working on debunking anything or confirming anything else.
One of our first experts, Ben Alderson-Day, a specialist in atypical cognition at Durham University, explained how he approaches this type of uncertainty.
At a very basic level, if you get stuck in a kind of loop of debunking, is it real or is it not, then you miss out on the richness of a lot of these experiences and you don't learn anything, like nothing moves on. We've been having these sorts of arguments for hundreds of years, and at least psychologists have been having these arguments with others since the dawn of psychology. In fact, many people don't realize that the discipline was in part set up by people who set out to understand the claims of psychics and mediums almost soon as spiritualism happens. So the debunking game is as old as the science of these things. But I find if you try and talk to somebody on their terms and try and understand, how it really hit for them, you can learn so much more about the varieties of human experience. So I try to start from that perspective.
The spiritualism connection is actually one of the reasons people suggest the house might be haunted. Mrs. Lincoln held seances in the large drawing room of the cottage while the family was in residence, in addition to several she hosted in the White House.
Her involvement in spiritualism, which is a religious movement that holds that people can communicate with the dead, began after the death of her son Willie in 1862. Willie was the second child the Lincolns lost to illness, and for Mary, the compounding grief of those losses was immense.
Spiritualism in America was spurred on by both the Civil War's significant disruption in the experience of grief and mourning, and by new communication technology like the telegraph. Death and funerary care had been intimate family experiences, but the war uprooted thousands of people from their homes to fight and die in far-flung places. Bereaved families in search of solace often turned to spiritualism as a pathway to closure and a way to make sense of this unfamiliar form of loss. If you could tap on a telegraph and talk to someone across the Atlantic, why not reach out to someone who had died? For more on this, you can check out episode 3.2, Wasn't She Crazy?, where Catherine Clinton explains this connection in more detail.
When we spoke with Dr. Michele Hanks, a cultural anthropologist at New York University who studies people's experiences with ghost-seeking and ghost tourism, she said this about spiritualism.
People are so dismissive of 19th century spiritualism in ways that are enraging, I think, honestly, and deeply anti-feminist. So many of the leaders of the suffrage movement were involved in spiritualism. It feels like a very thinly veiled mode of misogyny to me. I think spiritualism is endlessly interesting. And the fact that we talk about it like it's not a present day religion when it is, I'm endlessly interested.
It's important to me to approach this history with compassion Mary Lincoln was a smart woman. It's not like she fell for a scam when she became involved in spiritualism. I don't want us organizationally to focus on the ghost aspect in a way that would be dismissive of the real tragedies that this family experienced.
We have a story of loss here at the cottage, but we don't do spooky programming.
One of my very favorite Mary Lincoln quotes is that, quote, "A very slight veil separates us from the loved and lost." She was looking for connection with her loved ones, and Michele says that that's also one of the reasons that people today become involved in active ghost seeking.
There are two pathways to what I would call active ghost seeking. One is the death of a close loved one, where you have these unresolved spiritual questions, and the other is lifelong fascination with the supernatural. They watched Most Haunted and are curious. I don't know. For me, I sort of assume there's nothing when we die. And based on some of these ghost stories, I'm kind of happy about that. It seems like a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of sitting around and doing nothing. There's very little I've encountered in working with ghost seekers where I'm like, I would love to exist in that realm where I'm being summoned to entertain you and or try to communicate with my great-great-granddaughter.
I don't think I'd want to be a ghost either. Ben described two main patterns that emerge in his research on people feeling a mysterious sense of presence, which seem related to what Michele said earlier.
If we were to try and do a survey of people in the population who'd ever had these experiences, there are two main groups, I would say, who are having these experiences most commonly in a way that's not, say, part of a kind of health condition. One is people having it around the boundaries of sleep, sometimes in the context of sleep paralysis, which is a very common phenomenon, doesn't necessarily indicate a disorder. And the other is grief and bereavement. So we don't have particularly great stats on this because it's hard to get people to talk about it. Often the published research on this tends to survey samples of people who are already willing to talk about these experiences. Nevertheless, it seems like quite a high proportion of people in the context of bereavement, particularly for loved ones that they've lost, that been long-term partners, they will have experiences of kind of continuation in some way or feeling like they're being visited. And the most common form for that is a presence. After that would be a voice and then a vision in terms of how common they are.
We asked Ben to tell us a little bit more about how he became interested in this type of inquiry. He said he got started while on a big interdisciplinary project about auditory hallucinations.
And I guess via that work, I actually ended up exploring what we might call unusual experiences that happen in everyday life and seem to happen for some people more than others, particularly people who might consider themselves to have a spiritual gift in some way. And a thing that kept occurring from those people, but also say from patients that we talk to with psychosis or with schizophrenia, would be that, sometimes it's not so much about hearing a voice or seeing a vision. It's just this kind of very basic feeling of a presence being there. Somebody being there that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't hear. You just know they're there, but it's not a kind of thinking thing. You kind of know it in your bones. And often when I describe that to my friends or other people I know, then they've usually got a story to tell back to me, because everybody kind of knows that feeling. Some people might get it around the boundaries of sleep. Some people might get it at a real kind of crisis point in their lives. But it seems to be at the bedrock of a kind of human experience, a very basic feeling. And that's what I've been focusing on in my research for the past few years.
Have you got a story of feeling a mysterious presence? Maybe felt like you were being watched and couldn't figure out why? When explaining what he and his team actually do in their lab, Ben gave us an example from his research that, for reasons I don't really understand, is one of the scariest things I have ever heard.
So, to give you one example, presence is very common in survival stories, in kind of when people are really pushed to their limits. But whenever something kind of looks and smells like a legend, then you need to be pretty skeptical. And in the case of survival stories, we've got literal survivor bias. These are the ones that got down from the mountain or that got back from, sailing the ocean. We don't hear about the people who got scared by their presence and fell off the mountain. So one of the things we try and do in in-depth interviews is actually tease apart what is trope, what is expectation, and what seems to be getting at the unruliness of people's experiences. And what we find when we do that is actually some people are having sometimes some really quite ambivalent experiences, or they might actually have mixtures of presences, one that's quite malevolent or quite unsettling, and another one which is a bit more like a guardian. I interviewed a guy called Luke Robertson who skied solo to the South Pole in 2015. And he actually had two presences, one that was kind of willing him on, and another that was chasing him. And if it caught him, his heart was going to stop. And these things are interesting because if we're trying to understand in the brain what's happening mechanistically, we need to know if you're getting the whole spectrum of emotions.
I am going to add that to the long list of reasons I am never going to ski to the South Pole.
I was curious about how fear plays into this question of haunting. At the cottage, nobody has ever asked me this with, fear on their face or any sense of being afraid. But haunted house has a negative connotation. Why would someone want a house to be haunted?
I think one of the things that attracts people to haunted houses and the claim that, yes, this house is haunted, is it sets you up for what folklorists call like a legend trip, where you go somewhere and something might happen. You probably have all experienced legend trips at some point in your life. They're really common in high schools. You gotta go to this bridge at midnight and throw a penny off of it if you want to go to college. And they often take on a more like a scarier version. Like the famous one is in Iowa City at Cemetery. They have a black angel statue, and if you kiss someone in front of this black angel statue, you're going to die in 7 years. And obviously, the link between an angel and dying in 7 years is tentative, but it's thrilling to go and do that. There's a similar kind of thing with haunted houses.
Is it just because people want to be able to tell their friends they did something cool, or are they actually looking to connect with a ghost?
I think the answer is probably yes to both, right? Depending on the person. People I've worked with, there are many who desperately, desperately want ghosts to be real for any number of reasons. Or not even real, they want to know the answer to whether or not they're real. This motivates a huge portion of their leisure time. And then there are people who are just like, oh, that'd be cool. I mean, that'd be interesting. It'd be a fun thing. Like going to an amusement park is a fun thing. So I think it's a real spectrum. I don't think there's one answer to that question.
Michele also says that what people mean when they say a ghost is likely to have changed over time.
All of these are culturally, historically variable things, right? I think if we were talking in like early modern history, I think a haunted home might have a different connotation. I think it would be a sign of like, oh, there's trouble. There's unresolved trouble. We have to deal with this. You've got to trace the shift of ghosts from being these almost religious entities in like medieval period, where if you go back to the 14th century, ghosts walked the European landscape, but they were thought to be the devil's tricksters, right? If you saw a ghost, it was like the devil was coming for you. And then they become sort of 14th century England, like kind of the spirits of purgatory. There are these spirits who want to communicate or want to do things. And there's this period of kind of purposeful ghosts who are giving messages, or there are all of these great historical case studies. There's a dispute over inheritance and a ghost starts appearing and she becomes an object, an actor in the legal unfolding of the trial in early modern England. There's wild, interesting stuff. But like to get to haunted houses the way we talk about them today, you have to think and talk, I think, about secularism and secularity in the 19th century and the idea that ghosts decouple from any kind of religious framework or any set religious framework. There's an English folklorist in the late 19th century who calls them sort of, I think his phrase is purposeless creatures. They just show up and like they don't really have a purpose. They're not doing anything. They're just like this visible remnant of something that happened before. And so all of those shifts kind of take ghosts from being these Christian-oriented visions of ghosts to like this more flexible idea of a ghost.
In 2013, a team of ghost investigators working with a television show explored the cottage in the early evening. Another reason the house might be haunted has to do with what they found.
We'll let Tommy Griffiths, who still has the audio recordings from that session, explain.
I had always been a history fan, a Lincoln buff. I think I've read like 17 Lincoln biographies over time. And I had been talking about this on the radio on Big 100.3 when I was on the air. And somebody called up and said, we have a local ghost hunters group. Would you like to join us for one of our investigations? So we went to various locations throughout with different histories, and it was really cool. We got evidence with these ghost box things, which change frequencies. It goes, it goes from, in the FM band, from one frequency to the next in about a quarter to half a second maybe per frequency. So to get a full word or a full sentence, you have to have sound from 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different frequencies in a row. And it's said that spirits can talk through the invisible radio band wavelengths, and there's a lot of electrical energy tied in with that. So that being said, I wondered if anyone had ever investigated the Lincoln summer home. I called, and the folks that were there at the time said, no, you're more than welcome to give it a shot. So we went in and started playing with all our toys and got some really interesting things. I don't know what to make of it. It's compelling and it's a little bit spooky as well. We're getting voices that are answering in context. They are responding in meaningful ways. It's not just shouting out randomly. It's almost like it's a conversation with someone, whether they are repeating what we say or answering our questions directly. It seems like some sort of intelligence communicating with us. So I was intrigued by that. I figured it would be interesting to go in order of when we first walked in to the Lincoln Cottage and turned the ghost box on for the first time. I think this may be the first time we heard a voice. So see if you can hear what's going on. Is there anyone in here with us? Yes? You just want to say hello? That one was pretty obvious. Did you hear hello, hello, and hi? I mean, what else is that? That sounded like a woman, I'm not sure, or possibly a young man. Can't be certain, but there's certainly voices responding to hello. Hello, hello, hi. We heard that in real time, so it was like, oh, we got something. This is cool. So then, and by the way, we're in the largest room that you walk in. I remember rocking chairs in there, right in here. Is anyone in here? I had to go back. I heard voices there, and I had to go back. Do you hear the name Lincoln after the question, is there anybody here? Is anyone in here? The third one is barely audible, but did you hear that? And moving along, we're still in the parlor. What's your name? Robert. Hello, Robert. I knew immediately, that's why I said, Robert. I'm familiar with the Lincoln family, and Robert was the oldest who eventually had Mary committed. But listen, what's your name? What's your name?
Robert, is that you?
Yes. Robert, is that you? You hear a yes, sort of.
Robert, is that you?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And then a Robert again. And at this point there's something going on here. Is anyone in here? Again. That's the Lincoln one from previously. Still in the parlor, as you call it, Joan.
All right, is everybody in this room?
It's a nice room.
That is weird. Could you hear that? Really unusual.
What is your name? Robert.
Another Robert. But that didn't sound like the voice that we heard commenting on the room. Here's the room voice again.
It's a nice room.
What is your name? Robert.
Another Robert. So do we have more than one entity responding to what we're asking? And we just continue to throw out questions.
My name is Jerry. This is my friend Tommy. You can talk to us. Talk, yes. Yes.
So now they're starting to repeat what we're saying. It's crazy.
Robert, are you still here?
Three different voices, unless I'm hearing things. Hey, Robert, after, hey, Robert, are you still here?
Robert, are you still here?
Was that clear? Maybe we can figure out what it's saying. Robert Lincoln. Hard to tell. I'll go back one more time. Robert Lincoln. Robert Lincoln, why did you put your mother in an insane asylum? Did you hear what that said? Robert Lincoln, why would you put your mother in an insane asylum? What would you do? What would you do? That's really interesting. It's kind of sad too, if this is real. Almost pleading, what would you do? It was something that he struggled with, for sure. And then finally, and this is the last of the parlor room and the last of our evidence.
Was that hard to do, Rob?
Was that hard to do, Rob? It was. Something out of sight. It's a woman's voice. Not sure who that is. Out of sight.
Mary, are you here?
Mary, are you here? Yes. Another voice, another woman's voice. It's everyone's. It's everyone. And me. It's everyone and me. And after that, it just went quiet.
What kind of conclusion can we draw from this, if any?
In my opinion, but I try to keep an open mind. And open mind doesn't mean going to the far-fetched and the ridiculous. An open mind means being conservative and, out there on the edge. I would hope that we were actually speaking to the former residents of the Lincoln summer cottage. They identified themselves. They said the names. The first question was, what's your name? Robert. We didn't mention Robert once before that. So how did that guy know what we were looking for? I don't know, but whatever it is, in my mind, I think there's something there. Absolutely. And to get meaningful answers, why would you send your mother to an insane asylum? What would you do? Is an intelligent response.
Michele says this uncertainty is actually key to how people think about ghosts based on her research.
For me, when I started the project, I was like, okay, I'm interested in people's belief in ghosts. I kept coming back to this word belief. I was like, they believe in ghosts. They want the haunted house to be haunted because they believe in ghosts. And slowly over time, I probably more slowly than I should have realized this, I came to see that doubt was the biggest thing. I argue that doubt is the main way people engage ghosts. We think of doubt in kind of a limited way, I doubt that. But instead, for people who routinely are seeking out ghosts, they're not convinced they're real. They hope someday to be convinced they're real. Instead, they occupy this middle domain where they're like, maybe, but probably not. And so to me, that was really interesting. The language of belief, I think, hides how tentative so many people's connections to ghosts are.
Part of the experience seems to be maybe they are and maybe they're not. Ghosts are somewhere between the present and the past, and somewhere between the living and the dead. And that liminality and uncertainty seems to be part of the deal.
Here's Ben on trying to talk about the inexplicable.
So you're absolutely right. It feels like there's something about this experience or group of experience which really hits up against the limits of our language, of our linguistic worlds. And it's no mistake when I described it earlier that people just talk about things being there. And there is often the end of the sentence. That's just kind of as far as they can go. So there's something about it which it defies language in some way. And it might be that we live in an age where we've kind of forgotten how to talk about these things. That we tend to talk about sixth senses or this sort of stuff, or the inner eye. And maybe we'll recapture that in other ways, in other times or discourses. But people really struggle to talk about this. And in fact, say in the clinic, psychiatric clinic, it means that this stuff gets missed. People don't talk about it because they feel like it only happens to them. It's not part of standard interviews. It must mean that they're really mad because the clinician won't even talk about this stuff. If your culture has resources, stories, narratives that you can draw upon that can at least explain a bit about how you're feeling or the fact that other people have had it before, then that might be enough to get you through the next day or get you to the next week or talk to somebody else. And to some degree, it doesn't matter so much if it's true or not. It can do something, we can do something with these stories. And that's not to say that all stories are good. Sometimes people can be led down the wrong path with them, particularly when it comes to things like health. But when we're dealing with some of the most kind of unusual and ineffable parts of human experience, human consciousness, then as long as a gap is there, then that can sometimes be, one of the most difficult things. So I think it is really interesting to look at different cultures and think, well, how do they manage some of these difficult or unusual things? Is there anything that we can learn? Are there things that we can do around kind of acceptance and interpretation of different narratives? Because nobody's got the right answer here. Everybody's dealing with kind of challenges and problems.
In my experience, people who have asked about supernatural things, or even were just curious about, Mary Lincoln's interest in spiritualism, they tend to be the people who, to me, seem more open-minded and more receptive from the jump. So they're asking questions about other things. They seem present and excited. And so it just seems like they're already kind of open to the experience of being here. And then what we give them maybe amplifies the reaction that they have to that.
It's interesting you say that, because there is research directly showing that people who regularly have these experiences but don't find them distressing tend to also rate higher for personality characteristics, particularly one called openness to experience. So it doesn't surprise me at all that I think you've probably captured something really true with those people there.
We certainly encourage people to approach history with an open mind and encourage them to approach the world around them with more curiosity. From a historical thinking perspective, being comfortable in this realm of maybe or we're not sure is actually really helpful in grappling with the past.
We asked Ben if they can't usually explain where the feeling is coming from, what are people actually perceiving when they feel a sense of presence, visitation, or haunting?
We're used to talking about the five senses, being able to touch, hear, see things, smell things, taste things. And anything beyond that, we tend to kind of group into the sixth sense. But actually, if you ask specialists in sensory perception or philosophers of perception, they will say there's up to about 20 different sensory processes. And in that, we include things like being able to detect what your heart is doing or how your gut is doing. These are both usually grouped under a term called interoception. If you close your eyes and you hold your hand out in front of you, you have a sense of where your hand is. That's proprioception. That's the feedback from your muscles. We have a whole load of visceral senses about how our skin is reacting with the environment around us, whether it's to do with heat or light or airflow. And all these things combine to give us a sensory orchestra, which we are not very good at describing verbally. It's this kind of huge non-verbal sea of just how you're feeling in a room at any given time. So often when we, if we have that sense of somebody sat behind us in an auditorium or something like that, all it takes is a few glimpses of different parts of senses, especially those I've talked about in terms of how the body is experiencing the world, that can give you, some pretty good cues that somebody is behind you, and they might be. It doesn't mean you've got eyes in the back of your head. It doesn't mean you've got any sort of particularly special sixth sense or supernatural thing going on. But your body is very good at giving you these kind of subtle nudges. Present science is a very new field, realistically. It's only in the past few years that people have started studying it systematically, piecing it together from lots of different areas. So if we ask the same question in 5 or 10 years, we'll probably be able to tell you a lot more.
One of the other researchers in his field has been able to generate this feeling of presence in the lab, which might tell us more about what's happening in the brain.
Some of the things you can do in the lab to try and evoke presence is design experiments where you create sensory mismatches. So there was a team in Geneva led by a guy called Olaf Blanker, who they devised a robot that could evoke a presence experience by touching you in the back. So you sit on what looked like a kind of cocktail stool, and you had to put your hand into a handset and press out into the thin air as if you were pressing lots of kind of buttons randomly. And every time you pressed up, what would happen is there was a robot finger behind you touching you in your back. So if you go up, it goes up too. You go down, it goes down too. And after a while, if you're doing this in sync, you start to get an uncanny feeling. In fact, you begin to feel most of the time like you're touching your own back. And the reason for that is that your brain takes these signals in and goes, look, this is far too much of a coincidence that somebody would be touching my back in exactly the same way that I'm moving my hand. I'm getting all these signals through my arm. I'm getting all my proprioception. I'm getting these visual cues. And yet I'm getting the sensations on my back. And so the way your brain makes sense of that is to almost like move you back and make it as if you're touching your own back, which is impossible, but that's the way to resolve the coincidence. Now, what happens is if we then slowly turn that out of sync again, or make it kind of slightly jar, so that, say, the robot is slightly slower or kind of drags a bit, then over about 50% of people start to get a sudden feeling of presence, because what we've done is we've kind of created another sense of agency. We've just integrated this thing into our bodies, and then suddenly it's like, whoa, where did that come from? And like I say, it happens for most people. It doesn't happen for everyone. The people for whom it happens the most are people with Parkinson's, because people with Parkinson's have presences a lot. And if they have presences, you put them on the presence robot, they're getting this stuff like all the time. And we can also identify networks in the brain specific to this sort of experience, which are also specifically altered in people with Parkinson's presence experiences. So through those sorts of methods, we can kind of start to tie it together and try to understand what are the potential kind of processes and mechanisms underneath how a presence is felt.
He also says that our innate human tendency to look for patterns may be involved.
Sometimes people are interested in essentially places that create sensory mismatches or provide underlying kind of noise in our perceptual fields that then our brains try and resolve when we're not aware that they're doing it. So a bit like, if I stood you in the shower or with a detuned radio back when you had tuned radios, eventually you're probably going to hear some stuff in that, because essentially in the face of those sorts of uncontrolled, unresolvable stimuli, we tend to just try and find patterns there. So certainly there's lots of phenomena. Certain places seem to evoke these sorts of effects.
So, is there something about a place that might make it more likely to be haunted? How would this apply to the cottage?
So I think moments or historic sites or sites of any kind where there's visible friction between the past and the present are the ones most likely to engender those feelings of like, oh, this is a haunted space. One of the ways this can happen, I think, is when the remnants, whatever a person in the present takes to be a visible sign of the past appears, right? So like torn wallpaper, where underneath it you see layers of other wallpaper. That acts as a kind of register of the fact that there is this layered past. In my research, I can remember walking in the woods pretty late at night with a group of interlocutors, people I was doing research with. And we came across this absolutely decayed castle. It was like, and they were like, this is haunted. This is the real England. This is where everything is. The roughness of it, the visible roughness of it appealed to it. So I think that's one part of it. Those frictions, those visible frictions. But then also I think to your question, there are cultural ones that the site is either talking about or that you're perceiving at the site is frictive or complicated in some way in the present. That gives rise to the feeling too, I think.
I think you could make an argument that when we take people through the experience of the tour, we're trying to make the overlap of the past and present more visible on purpose. If there's any kind of energy pathway that gets formed, we're reinforcing it every single day with the route of the tour and the parts of the past that it evokes.
For me personally, all the places where I've had visitors report some kind of experience like this have been empty in one way or the other. A battlefield, some kind of landscape, or the cottage rooms that are largely empty of furniture. Ben says that emptiness might bring up expectations that contribute to the likelihood of people feeling something there.
He and Michele agreed that the narrative quality of the tour might have something to do with it as well.
In geography, there's a load of research on this. Julian Holloway, he's an English geographer, has written about structures of enchantment and how exactly what you're describing, like the intersection of architecture, storytelling, narration, visitor expectation can produce this. And I think there's a pretty porous boundary to what people are looking for when they are hoping his ghost is somewhere or hoping anyone's ghost is there.
And I'm guessing this is a powerful narrative, right? It means things to people, particularly presumably when they get up to the bedroom and they're thinking about the Emancipation Proclamation, and people are going to be invested in this. There's lots of expectation at different points. It's notable you talk about transitions a lot of the time, so people kind of coming through the door, people about to go up the stairs. I mean, it's kind of analogous to, people haven't done direct research on this, but when people get shivers down their spine when they're listening to certain pieces of music, for example, it hits us very kind of viscerally. But the whole point is, what's happening there is we're kind of syncing up with our anticipation, our arousal, our just enjoyment in what's there. It's like it's all coming together, and it hits us in a kind of bodily way as well. So it strikes me that it wouldn't be surprising that, at least for some people going through the house, something's happening there where they're kind of getting in sync with perhaps with narrative and perhaps with expectation.
In 2017, we completed a neuroscientific study of the visitor experience here at the Cottage, where we looked into how place, story, and ritual impacted people here. The results show that both the building itself and nature of the tour are critical in creating what respondents describe as an emotional experience that shapes what people remember about their visit. There's a there. The ritual performance of the tour is meaningful in shaping how people think about the place and about themselves.
For me, it's always been less like a ghost was there and more like the place itself was alive and present in some additional way. It's part of what makes me proud to steward it and to share it with others.
So, is the house haunted? We encourage you to come see for yourself sometime and to help us keep this special place alive and thriving. In the meantime, we want to encourage you to think about, have you ever felt something inexplicable? How can you avoid the impulse to pin things down into categories of real or not real? Who around you is seeking something they haven't found? And how can you show them compassion along the way?
This episode was produced by me, Joan Cummins, with Callie Hawkins, Haley Bryant, and additional support from the President Lincoln's Cottage team. Music for Q&A was written, performed, and is copyrighted by Clancy Newman.
Your support makes Q&A possible. If you enjoy coming along for the journey with us, please show your support by making a contribution at lincolncottage.org. Whether it's $5 or $500, we couldn't do it without you. You can also support us by hitting subscribe, by leaving a review, or by sharing it with friends.
To the visitors with this question, thanks for recognizing the power of this place in a way that's hard to explain in words.
Comments? Questions? Write to us at podcast@lincolncottage.org.
President Lincoln's Cottage is a home for brave ideas. Stay curious.